Welcome back to an episode of the Million Dollar Dad podcast. Here with my buddy Parker. Parker is a member of the Million Dollar Dads community, pretty much like the OG member. Parker, I think you were here you were like number 1, 2, 3, or 4. You were like really OG. So a little bit of a unique episode here is kind of having Parker on as not only somebody that's doing some interesting things in the world of real estate and property management, but then also kind of a member pod like we just did with Rami, somebody that's inside the membership. So Parker, thanks for being here, man. Thanks for setting this up. We were supposed to do this 3 weeks ago and then I screwed it up. So thanks for coming back. And hopefully it's like a fine wine, man. Everything's just a little bit better as we aged 3 weeks longer.
I think so, right? I think so. But no, man, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. So just give me a little so I framed it up a little bit what you do now. You're in the property management space, kind of like multi-location all over the place. You have a big portfolio that you're managing. But give me a little background story. Give me like Parker from 5 years old to now and help us understand kind of just what that upbringing looked like and kind of all the different things and decisions and life circumstances that brought you to today. If you can do all that in 30 seconds, that'd be great.
Yeah, exactly. You've got 100 words. Make it
Right.
an original Twitter
Do it
post.
in a tweet. Do it in a
Yeah.
tweet.
Um, I will keep it as brief as I can. I kind of have a unique upbringing. My parents were never married. They dated on and off for a few years, and then I was actually kind of like after they broke up, rebound. Both of them had other families before. My mom has an older daughter with her first husband. My dad has two sons with his first wife. Then they were here, they had me, and then they separated. So I have seven half siblings. Well, half were step siblings, but no full siblings. My oldest brother's 43, and my youngest sister's 23. I mean, to give you a sense of how crazy my upbringing is, I have two sisters named Lauren. So, so it's kind of funny. I grew up in a very small town in the suburbs of basically Silicon Valley, like the closest you can live to the beach and still commute to the big tech companies. And it's a town of 11,000 people, super idyllic. My mom grew up there. It's called Scotts Valley. It's right by Santa Cruz. It's definitely a little bit of a sheltered bubble. And, Santa Cruz is also a very unique place culturally. And it was really interesting to be so close to like the tech boom of the 90s and thousands. And then you also have this little surfer hippie beach community. And I was a really high level soccer player. So there's a big Hispanic population in Santa Cruz County. And so it was me and two other kids were the white kids on the team. But we were in the top 10 in the country for like 6 years. We played in one national championship. Unfortunately, we lost, but we made it to the top four twice. And then we made it to the top six once and then top 10 two other times. So I was originally supposed to play professional soccer. At least that's what I had in my head. But I ended up blowing out my knee. I'd had my first knee surgery at 14, and then I dislocated my kneecap at 16. But I had like 10 Division I offers. I was, multiple. I had one trial and was working on the next trial for a professional team in England. So soccer was like my whole life. And then my parents are both very academic. So I actually graduated high school at 16 with like, I don't know, 60 college credits. And that's its own story of how I almost got kicked out of all colleges because I thought I was lying on my application. But that's a separate thing. Anyways, when I blew out my knee at 16 and went to college, I was too young and I was kind of forced into all of this. And I decided in my mind, it was like, hey, I never went out and really partied. My weekends were always dedicated to this. I'm like, I'm going to go catch up for time lost. Right. Um, so I got into, standard drinking, smoking stuff in college, and I was still a decent student. I wasn't like a major degenerate, but I certainly was not fulfilling my potential by any stretch of the imagination. Looking back now, there was a lot of depression and stuff that had happened when the plan I'd had for my life was taken from me, but I was, 17, 18, 19 years old. I didn't know anything about that. Really cool experience studying abroad in Rome when I was in college. I got a double major in history and classical studies. The Rome stuff we can talk offline, but I have some really crazy stories of the 6 months I was there. But I ended up graduating college in 2012 and immediately basically got a call from a friend. I was literally doing nothing, had no plans. I was working at a like science store for kids. And a friend of mine was still going to UC San Diego and called me and said, "Hey, we have a space in our house. You should come down." That was on a Tuesday. I went down that day. I decided to move on Thursday, and I got my first big boy job on Monday, April 1st, 2013. And that was cold calling, selling Facebook business pages and websites to realtors. It's a company called Z57. If there's any realtors here, you've probably been called by them. Um, Really quickly, I learned I'm actually really good at sales. Within like 4, 5, 6 months, I started breaking sales records. The average time, what they call an open, where you get somebody to talk to you, the average in the company was like 150 to 250 calls. I set a record of for 4 months. It would take me 12 cold calls to get somebody to fill out a questionnaire with me.
Hmm.
So I was very, very, very good at getting people to talk on the phone. And that was also where I met my girlfriend, who's now become my wife. She was a few years older. She already had a kid. And I was very interested very quickly. And 3 months into us dating, I was 21 years old and she got pregnant. And that was when my life really changed. Basically, I got to decide, do I want to be this person who I self defeat, underperform, and everything? Or do I want to be the person who I think I can be? And I consciously decided to be the person I think I can be. And that was when I really started building. Um, my wife's aunt had a insurance business doing property and casualty insurance. And I went into that. I had no experience. They didn't have any experience. She just bought the business and had no idea how to grow it. And so I learned on my own, I learned how to think about business by, oh my God, if I go talk to realtors, they could potentially give me business. And that's so simple. We all know that. But to not be told that, to be able to learn it myself, I think really planted something that worked really well. My first year in insurance, I was working at a restaurant, bartending and serving at night. So I'd work from 4 p.m. to about 2 a.m., 6 days a week. And then I'd get up, take my steps onto school, and then I would start at 8 o'clock until 4 o'clock working in the insurance business. And we had a new baby with a bunch of health problems. So it was a pretty crazy year and a half. But eventually built up the insurance business where I was doing really well. But the opportunity wasn't really big enough for what I wanted in my life. And I'd met through my specialty in insurance, my business partner, because I ended up building the largest insurer of real estate investment in San Diego at the time. We were insuring like 500 to 700 flips a year. We built it up to about 2,000 rental units under our insurance portfolio. And so my business partner was already a property manager. And so we were good referral partners, right? He had people who needed insurance. I had people who needed property management. So after basically a 30-minute conversation, he and I decided to partner up and go launch uh, Tenant Planet's Northern California location. That was in 2018. And we've just really never looked back since. We ultimately combined the two businesses, and now we're the co-owners of Tenant Planet. We went from basically 120 doors when we started to over 1,000 in 5 years. And it's been a brutal, crazy journey, but I wouldn't change it for anything. Whether I've done almost 1,000 flights now since I started, since I started traveling in 2018. So it's been wild, but now I have 4 kids, and now I have a relatively successful business, and now it's time to start launching some other things and expanding the view. So that's the 8-minute Reader's Digest birth to today.
That's cool. I want to get into a little bit about the property management segment of real estate, because something that you said and you talked about in our group, um, a few weeks ago, a month ago, or whatever, talking about why you believe property management is the best real estate play. So I want to talk into that. I want to talk about that in a little bit. I want to rewind the clock though, back to 2014. You said your first knee surgery was in 2014. Is that right?
No, when I was 14, so that would
Oh,
have
when you were
been
14. Okay,
2005.
got it. So 2005, you blow out your knee. You're going to be the next Ronaldo. And obviously, one of the characteristics in a person that I look for that I would want to ever get in business with is a high level competitive athlete. And the higher the level that you're competitive at is better in my mind, because if you're a competitive athlete and you're playing at a high level, I think you can tell a lot about somebody. In my world is basketball, right? Like you can tell a lot about a person by the way that they play basketball. You got and you would probably say the same about soccer, but in the basketball world, you got the scrappy guy that gets every rebound, can't shoot for the life of him, but that dude is a grinder. And in the world of business, like he's probably a savage also, because he's a savage on the basketball court. I think the sports and business, they relate so much. So rewind the clock to your 14. You have these dreams of professional soccer, D1 soccer, and then literally like the worst thing in your life could happen and you blow out your knee, seemingly kind of puts you into, I wouldn't say a spiral, but going down the path of like the traditional. I would have to assume if you didn't blow out your knee, you probably wouldn't have partied as hard as you maybe did post knee blowout, right? So take me back to that time as a 14-year-old kid blowing out your knee. How did that moment in the moment change the trajectory? And then looking back on it, how do you view that moment in your life?
Yeah, and I apologize. It was me. I'll clarify. The one that ended my career was when I was 16. That was the second knee surgery when I dislocated my kneecap. But at the time, I tried to continue on. I was fortunate. The knee surgeon I had for both my surgeries is at the time was the surgeon for multiple Niners and Giants, Warriors. His the SOAR clinic that he worked in it's one of the best orthopedic surgery centers in the world. Um, I thought I was gonna. I thought it was just a blip after having gone through it at 14. Okay, I'll just recover and I'll get better. Unfortunately, I have some specific, basically like birth defects related to my knees that make them especially susceptible. And so I thought I would go through my rehab and do all of that work and it would be better. And it became pretty clear pretty quickly that I could only ever play this game with a knee brace again. You've never seen a professional or college athlete with a knee brace. Just a coach won't go near you. There's no point, right? So in certain ways, it was almost worse that I didn't come off the field and they didn't tell me just you can never play again, right? Or you won't be able to walk. Instead, it was this really kind of tragic decline where I had to face the music over time. Um, I think the adversity has worked out well. Uh, it was extremely difficult to lose the rhythm of my life. And I think that one of the things that I learned about myself was part of the reason why I had been so well on the straight and narrow was because I was occupied all the time. There was no
Mm,
opportunity. I'm very much a idle hands, the devil makes play. If I'm not very busy, I'm the sort of guy who's like, man, I don't have anything to do today. I'll grab a beer at 3:30 in the afternoon. Like I'm just like that. It's like, oh, I'll just let's play some video games. Now I'm also the sort of person where it's like you can stack me 14 hours deep for 14 weeks in a row, and I will get it done. I won't miss. I'll be there. So my key takeaways for it are just I think that whether somebody's religious and views this as a religious thing or it's just the universe or just facts of life, like a lot of the worst things that happen in the moment can become the best things. If I had become a professional soccer player, I'm sure that there's some alternate universe where I'm living a great life and I would have been a probably relatively mediocre professional soccer player. I mean, I was a very good youth and low level soccer player, but I wasn't going to be Messi. I doubt I would have made the national team, but I probably could have made a living. And it's like that person's probably very happy. But without that, what it forced me to do was start taking stock of and thinking about the bigger picture of my life. When you just say, I'm going to do this, it doesn't take any consideration for the future. In many ways, I was like almost, like in the technical term, not the offensive term, like retarded, delayed in my growth of thinking about being a grown up because I always said it's just going to be soccer. It took some time to swallow that and kind of chew that into a place that I could actually digest it and process it. But what I will say is, without that adjustment, nothing in my life would be where it is today. And it's most of what's happened today is actually based on things that in the moment were considered these massive failure, tragic things, right? Getting your girlfriend pregnant when you're 21, she already has a kid, you can't support yourself. And like you can't support three people, of course, and like that was considered a massive failure in the moment. It turns out to be probably the most important thing that ever happened to me. And I think the real test of character for people is how you can turn what most people would say are really terrible or really unfortunate or really whatever events and make those the kind of fodder on which you build your power. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I can relate to being a young parent as well. We have 4 children, soon to be 5, and there's something about that moment when you become a father that you can't explain to people who aren't parents. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you I still have friends to this day that don't have children, and they don't get it why when I say that I can't do something, or
Oh, I know.
and just lifestyle is completely different. So I can't imagine. I would have to imagine that being a young parent of then 2 at that point, really, because um, it completely changes the trajectory of your life and where you're at now. How much of your, I'm going to put in air quotes, like success, right? Because like you had said before, relatively successful business operation right now. Not saying that it's anywhere near where you want it to be or where you envision it to be, like 5-10 years from now. How much
Mhm.
of that success do you draw from, do you think comes from previous successes as a low level, high level athlete, low level soccer, and just kind of that the grit and everything that comes with being a high level athlete? Is there any correlation there?
Yeah, I think there is. I mean, so when it comes to sports, and it's funny because now my oldest son is almost 17. He's a very high level soccer player. He's a lot more talented than I was in terms of the ball at his feet, but what he doesn't have, therefore, is the same work rate and the same brain for the game because I had to compensate for the fact that I'm not the fastest, I'm not the tallest, I'm not the strongest, right? I think the principles of sport transcend sport. I had a a Peruvian soccer coach who was the one who kind of set our team up, and for the fact that we came from a place with 150,000 total people in our county, and we were in a top 10 in the country for our age group, is like it speaks to how well he developed people. Um, he used to say, if you want to change your game, you got to change your life.
Hmm.
And I think that that's abundantly true. I think the way that you train, the way that you play, the way that you like, and I think it's probably true in every sport, is reflective of the way you behave as a human being. Learning to think tactically on a soccer field, it's hard for me to know if that helps me think tactically in business. But what I will say is learning to win, I think, is one of the most important
Hmm.
things that you can give your children. And the whole participation trophy BS, like that stuff isn't it. And it's okay to tell them, hey, great job, you tried, right? We should reward that and congratulate it. But ultimately, we should be teaching people to win and more like beyond win, do what it takes to win. That doesn't mean break the rules. That doesn't mean break somebody's ankles. But it does mean it's like when there's 45 seconds left on the clock and you're 1-0 down, like this game isn't over, right? You need to do whatever it takes to get there. So I think there's a lot to be said about grit and perseverance that has gone a long way. I kind of learned early on or developed over time. This is kind of a bit of my personal philosophy is if you do actually, like most people say, oh, I'll do whatever it takes. And I always call anyone out of my team. I'm like, that's utter, like, you don't say that in my presence. Because the reality is that I believe if you really are willing to do whatever it takes and you're doing it in the right way, you can do anything. The problem is most people don't actually believe that. When they say, I'll do whatever it takes, they mean between the hours of 9:01 a.m. and 4:59 p.m. Or they mean, well, I'll make 10 calls today, but I won't make 100, or I won't go to, this meeting. I won't jump on a flight and take the red eye tonight. And I won't spend my last dollar. I won't build up credit card debt or whatever. For those that are really willing to do it, anything, I actually believe that anything's possible. It's just most people's threshold's way lower. And on the soccer field or on the basketball court, when you're literally exhausted, it's like I've ran myself into heat stroke. I've blown out my knee. Like I'm sure you've had similar experiences. You kind of learn. Like my coach used to also say, you always need to have 3 sprints left in the tank. No
Hmm.
matter how tired you are, you always just need to know, I just need to be able to do 3 more. And I think building that is probably the most analogous to business because you know as well as I do. I mean, it can be brutal, especially with a family. There's times where you want to be there for your kids and you have to decide, am I setting a professional example or am I kissing them tonight? It's a hard choice. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. For sure. And usually when somebody says they're willing to do whatever it takes, it's followed by a 3-letter word, but I'm not
Mm-hmm.
gonna, or I can't do, or this won't. So yeah, it's definitely. I love your analogy, or I love your coach that said you got to have 3 sprints left in the tank, because honestly, like no matter how down and out you are, you probably always do have 3 more. Like you can do 3 more sprints. They're not going to be as fast as your first 3 were, but you can give it the effort that in the moment that of what you have, right? And it's really tough, where I struggle personally. The easiest person to let down is myself. It's so much easier, whether it's for right now. I'm training and doing training to do a half marathon, so I'm running a
Nice.
lot for me, and it's so easy to be out there at mile 4 of an 8-mile run and be like, man, I'll be okay just doing 6 today. 6 is fine. And then that internal dialogue is just me and me. And that person is really easy to let down. But if you were with me running and you were going to do 8 and I was going to do 8, it'd be a lot harder to let you down. So the person that
Mm-hmm.
can master the inner game, the inner dialogue of 3 more sprints, but not only just 3 more sprints, 3 more sprints when it's just you at the track and that's it, where you could take your shoes off and go home or lace them up and go 3 more. So I think that there's a lot of wisdom in what you're saying there, man. And I'd like to take a not so easy pivot into the world of business right now, coming off of that philosophical conversation that you just set up. But tell us a little bit about the property management company now. I want to eventually get into this conversation of property, like the real estate through property management. I think that's an interesting conversation. I think it's a unique take that you're not going to hear everywhere. So tell us a little bit. I know it's like over 1,000 doors, but tell us a little bit about let's dive into the nuts and bolts about this business, because there might be somebody listening to this who is in a similar place, or me knowing your future plans somewhat, there might be somebody who might be a good partner on the other end of this conversation or in our own
So,
community. So tell us a little bit
so
about what it looks like now, and then we'll get into conversation about what your plan is and why you approach it the way you do.
yeah. So where we are now, as you mentioned, a little over 1,000 doors. We have offices. Our headquarters is San Diego. That was the first office. Our next biggest location is the Bay Area, then Orange County, then Boise, and then we just launched LA at the start of August. We've got 24 teammates, I believe, 20 between 23 and 25. Um, we have a pretty unique business model. It's slowly picked up more since we started, but we have a very low ongoing management fee of $99 a month per unit. And then we charge a tenant placement fee. We have two options, but most people pick 1 month's rent. It comes with a 2-year guarantee. And that model has a lot of benefits. A, it allows us to sustain leasing agents who work for commission.
Mm.
So they place a tenant, they earn a commission as opposed to us having to pay them hourly. Um, in terms of where we're going, we want to be the largest third party property management company in the country. That would mean getting to north of 50,000 doors, give or take. There's some competing competing arguments on what's there. We primarily do single family homes. That's about 75 or 70% of our portfolio. About 25% is multifamily, and then about 5% small office commercial. Um, let's see. As far as kind of the business for us, I mean, it's a property management is a very hard business.
Mm-hmm.
On my future companies will be optimizing for easy, but it's a extremely difficult business, and we do it now that we've gotten into LA. We do it in literally the hardest markets in the country, except for maybe New York. But I don't actually, from the research I've done, I think San Francisco, like the various 5 counties around San Francisco plus LA, are the hardest places in the country to manage property in terms of regulation, tenant protections, etc. So we've kind of been forged in the crucible. Many of the largest third party property managers in the country just won't come to California for the problems that we're learning to solve. Um, so that's kind of the basis of where we are. And I'm happy to talk through why I think for somebody considering getting into real estate investment, property management is good. Or if you have questions about the business, let me know.
Yeah, I do want to get into that. I want to rewind the clock just a little bit to when you first started. I know you have a business partner, and there's some, you kind of brought two worlds together, but how did you start the company? And kind of like, no, for me, having an inside snapshot or view of like what property management looks like. I know a lot of local property managers. And when you say grind, when people say things are a grind, like there is no grind like property management and scaling property management. So, how did you start the company? And then, like, walk me through the first 6 months of what it looked like, of probably getting your face kicked in for a while. Um, take me
So
through that story.
yeah, I was lucky. My business partner had come from property management. He'd worked in it for a few years before me, got his broker's license, and it was a family business. His uncle, unfortunately, was diagnosed with a serious health condition and had this business that he started as like a 22-year-old or something in like 1980. And so there was a core 150, 200 units that were in southern San Diego that had been there forever that my business partner ultimately bought from his uncle. And so I knew him at that time, but we had never considered working together. And we kind of could tell early on we were entrepreneurial. And so he'd been kind of running it for about a year. And then we decided to partner up and said we'll go launch Northern California. And so we actually started a separate business to do that at that time, which we then merged back together with the main business. And I immediately got my real estate license. And the reason I was interested in was because I'd kind of been duped is too strong of a word, but the promises that had been made to me in the insurance business I was building beforehand in terms of taking over that business and some other opportunities for growth that I wanted to be interested in ended up not coming to fruition. And so I'd always known I wanted to, like, I was already a 1099 and kind of doing my own thing, but I knew I needed to be running the business if I was going to be involved in my next venture. You know, the nice thing about a small property management company is there's very few problems. It's basically 90% sales. Now,
Mm.
don't get me wrong, the first time we stepped off a plane in Northern California, I think it was like January 28th, 2018, we got a call that a entire family almost died of carbon monoxide poisoning because grandma was cooking beans on the stove and never opened a window, and the carbon monoxide detector we'd installed literally 3 weeks before was faulty. So like there's still problems that can happen, but when you're kind of ambitious and hungry and young like my business partner and I were at the time, and there's not actually all that many units to manage, we got to spend the first maybe 2 years just selling constantly. I mean, that's what our day was. Now we had to go serve notices and help with the team and stuff, but basically it was figuring out how to create the marketing machine and create the sales machine. And I loved it. I loved sales. Every time we did, it's like, oh cool, here's another $80 a month and here's another tenant placement fee. In property management, you hit what my business partner and I have since coined the trough of sorrows at about 400. It goes from about 400 to about 650 units. And there's a reason why almost no property managers ever break past that size. It is extremely difficult because you hit a scale where there's constant problems and there's massive expectations, but there's not enough money to
Hmm.
pay for the support necessary. So it was a very brutal grind through that period. And when you come out the tail end, it's not like everything gets all rosy and perfect straight away. But all of a sudden, at least now you can afford to put things in place and how they go. But it started out with sales, and I mean, I don't know. It's funny, man, because on Twitter, like every once in a while, I'm like, oh, like somebody's asking for a crazy landlord story, and then I rack my brain, and I'm like, I've got a lot of crazy landlord stories that I don't even think of ever because they're just so common. But
Right.
yeah,
Well, going back to you talked about the marketing machine, and we were just talking the other day about people don't realize what it takes, to actually run a company and to kind of stick those dollars into. You have a heavy marketing budget. I know we have a very heavy 6-figure plus marketing budget every year, but that's just like what it takes. Like that's the entry fee into um, successful business, to be honest. And it becomes a math problem at some point, right? So you go back to your sales skills from insurance, which you were very, very good at. And um, you kind of, Rami talked about v- utilizing your past to vertically integrate your present, meaning taking the skills. Brandon Turner talks about skill stacking. So you took that sales skills from the past in the insurance business, and that sounds like it was your crutch for getting this off the ground in the early days. So leveraging your skill set, I think a lot of people will try to focus on their weaknesses and try to get way better at the weaknesses and where they're not good, but there's probably a higher return on taking the things that you're really good at and then just getting even better at them. And I think that's something that it sounds like you did really, really well in the beginning. And it's taken you through the trough of sorrows from 4 to 600.
yeah, I mean, so first off, there's not a business owner in the world, no matter what they say they are, that isn't a salesperson. Um,
Or a
you know,
husband who isn't a salesperson.
so what I'll say is like number one, sales skills I think is one of the most important skill sets that you can develop. Because you're right. You're in a form of negotiation and persuasion in anything you do. Like people get offended at this word, but the reality is we're all constantly manipulating everyone around us. We just are. Like you're manipulating your kids to go to bed on time. Now, manipulating has this really negative connotation, but when you look at the actual dictionary definition, it's just trying to get other people to do things, right? And it's like we're all doing that constantly. And one of the best value ways to do that is get people to buy your product. Now, what I'll say is, I think that probably the hardest adjustment. So, when you take a business from an owner operator to like a really saleable asset, right, where you're not being judged on, oh, it's 1.5 revenue to now it's a multiple of profit. The transition that happens there is fundamentally when members of your team can be doing non-productive or revenue generating tasks. And that's really, really difficult. I was talking to Zach Powell from the group just yesterday about how he's gone through. He's like, I used to have to be the closer for everything. He's like, it's so hard to see how the conversion rate drops, the customer acquisition cost goes up when I'm not closing them, but I can't close them forever. I don't want this to be my job. I want this to be my business, right? So figuring out how to be productive day one in that business. Like my business partner knew a ton about property management. I could just learn from him. But for me, I knew I can figure out how to get leads. I built like I went from 0 to almost 700 flips insured in my last year in like 3.5 years. I knew how to build a market, find a place. Like I knew I could do that. But the nice thing about sales is you know that every minute you're on the phone with a prospect or a client, that's just about the most valuable thing you can do in that business right then. So there's
Mhm.
no noise, there's no prioritization. It's just sell. This one activity will be the best thing I can do right now, and it makes it really easy to do good stuff for your business if you just pick calling leads.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned your business partner was really had the property management aspect of things kind of dialed in. I want to touch on partnerships for a second. You also said earlier that you could just tell right away that it was going to be a good fit. It was going to. So, in your opinion, what's your overall take on partnerships? I'm obviously going to assume you're bullish on partnerships. They're a good thing. Uh, and what makes a good partnership? What does it take to keep the partnership good long term? Because our business is also a partnership. Blue Badger Home Buyers. I have my thoughts, but I'm curious, your overall take on partnerships, because I also think that there's somebody listening that is interested in getting started in something, and they continue to not make them. They continue to not push forward. However, I believe if they had a partner, it would probably help get them into action quicker, because there's just something psychological about having a partner involved with you, where one plus one no longer equals two. One plus one can equal five. So tell me a little bit about your take on partnerships.
Yeah, so it's interesting you say that because that's how, I mean, the Gestalt thing is how my business partner and I talk about it. We're not one plus one equals two. We're like one plus one equals 347. We've probably either been on the phone or in person 50 to 60 hours a week on average for the last 6 years we've been working together. I probably have seen him more hours than I've seen my wife. The first thing I'll say in terms of giving somebody advice, like one thing, whether it's marriage or a business partnership, one thing that's really valuable that I think most people don't recognize about partnerships is they remove so many other decisions. So, like for example, you get married. Now you don't need Twitter. You don't need you don't need to go to the bar. Like all of a sudden, it's like, oh, I just have my person. That's just settled, right? And for my business partner and I, it's similar. It's like he does that thing, I do this thing. Now, it's funny because we both have egos. We're both like alphas, think we're the smartest person in the room. I think one thing that happened really well for both of us was we're intellectually pretty similar in terms of like, I think it would be hard to have one person who's super smart, one person who isn't. Like, I think you need to find somebody who's your equal in the way you think about things. Um, but the second thing is, it was like you mentioned earlier with the run. It's like having a partner is really great because you spend a lot of time like, shit, I can't let them down. It's
Right.
like, damn, I got to handle that email. You know what I mean? Like, I got to get back to that person. So you kind of push each other on in that way. But I think the main thing that I would recommend to anyone, and we've had members of our team, like agents who want to pair up, and they've always failed. The only way that I know that can make this work, make a partnership work long term, is you can't keep score. Right now, I'm in a period that happens to be like, if you looked at the life of my business partner and I'm like 4x busier than him.
Hmm.
Like, I'm generally the operator. He's more of the like visionary, long term thinker. That like the guy can barely check his emails, but he's also a hyper genius in strategy and the way to execute. You know what I mean? So it's like right now is a very operation intensive period in this business, and I'm working probably 50 to 60 hours a week, and he's probably working 15. Right? Don't get me wrong. He'll be sitting there thinking and like, oh, I'm messing around on a spreadsheet, but like he's not in a high pressure period. If you're the sort of person who, when that happens, you're thinking, oh, look at it, they're stealing a living from me. Do something, right? First off, you're not smart enough to realize, hey, every once in a while, I'm going to be the one who's on the slow period and they'll be on the busy period. But it also is just, there's no point, right? It's like if you're with a spouse, it's like it doesn't matter who's done
Right.
more laundry, who's changed more diapers. It's like It doesn't matter. It's just, are we both pitching into a point that we're achieving the life that we want and nobody's feeling taken advantage of or anything else? So I'd say that keeping score is probably the biggest thing. Finding complementary skills. I knew very early on there were certain things I'm not that good at and I certainly don't like to do. Most of the things I'm really good at, my business partner's not that good at and hates to do. So you kind of find complementary skills, complementary mindsets, and long term vision, and then you don't keep score. And I believe you could pretty much be a partner with anyone. Imagine, sorry to spend a little longer, but imagine, you know how they use, oh, like if we were the last two people in the world, right? It's like, actually, if you were the last two people in the world, you could build a relationship with anyone,
Right.
right? Like, think about it realistically, because you'd bend. There's no other option. The boats are burned. As long as you've decided, like, if you have literally no other options, you're going to figure it out, no matter what that person acts like, smells like, looks like, talks like, thinks like. We as human beings have an immense capacity to make it work with anyone when we decide to.
Yeah, totally. And I think you talked about, alluding to what I said earlier about the run. You're What's the best way to set the game up so that I always win? I think about this from the book Willpower Doesn't Work from Benjamin Hardy.
Yep.
He's a big fan of like your environment. You setting up your environment for we all have different environments where we perform different tasks and things like that. But how do you set the game up to win? Well, if you know that you're somebody that maybe lets yourself down, a great way to build built-in accountability is to have a partner because you will not let that partner down. And then the other thing I think about is the rocket fuel concept, visionary and integrator, right? It sounds like you're familiar
I've
conversation.
read Rocket Fuel. Absolutely.
Same way. Like I personally am more of a visionary where there'll be times where it's like, I mean, I'm doing this podcast with you. I'm not working on our Blue Badger business right now. However, in those 15 hours that your partner will work a week in this season right now, you could argue are just as valuable as the 50 that you're running the operations because it's certain, I've known like there's certain relationships that I've created in our business that have skyrocketed certain things for our businesses where it was me going out to coffee with somebody or me doing a podcast with you, which led to another relationship that could lead to something that doesn't seem like work. I'm not going on a sales call. I'm not talking with a seller, but it's invaluable when it comes to the integration and the complementary skill sets of the business. So
Totally.
I let's touch on as we kind of wrap up. Let's touch on this aspect of, and maybe it'll be a conversation we tease a conversation for another conversation in the future. But why do you think your kind of hot take on property management as a real estate play? You alluded to a little bit of something earlier when you were talking about the early sales days, and when you made a sale, it's like, hey, that's $80 a month. My mind immediately goes to, oh, that's kind of like a rental property. You own what I'm thinking right now is you have the ultimate arbitrage of cash flow, property management. So am I on the right path there? Tell me a little bit about why you think property management could be the best real estate play for somebody looking to get exposure to real estate.
Yeah, so you are on the right path. And I'll point out that it's kind of a unique thing because this is really only true at two scales. Small scale, somebody managing maybe up to 100 units on basically on their own, maybe they have an assistant. And when you get past say 2500 units, in between, owning the equivalent cash flow of real estate is generally probably better. I'll say that it's not like it's a clear, obvious win, and I'll give you an honest take on the pros and cons of both. But fundamentally, here's why. If you want to buy a rental property in this country, and we'll have to ignore certain people on Twitter who buy them for $15,000, but if you take the median priced house in the country right now, what is it? 350 grand. That 350 grand, if you're lucky, is going to produce maybe $2,000 a month. That would be like solid. Maybe 2,500 if you're in a great market. Okay. when I acquire the management of that property, now we don't charge 10%, but I'm just going to use it for round numbers because plenty of companies do. I would get 10% of not the net income, the gross rental income of that property for the acquisition cost of not 350,000, but about $500 to acquire that customer. Okay. 10% of the income for, I don't know what 500 is compared to 350,000, but it's approximately, 1/1000th. It's 1/800th, give or take, of the cost. So 10% of the income for 1/800th of the cost. Now, on a small scale, here's the nice thing about that. This is why at a small business, somebody who says, hey, I want to go buy a fourplex, and I might tell them, maybe you just want to manage 30 units, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because what we'd say is for somebody, if we're saying you're getting about 10% of the income, it's probably averages closer to 8%, but that would mean for 2 rentals, $700,000 on the median price, you just need to be managing 20 units to get the same income. 4 rentals would be 40 units. Now, the beauty of that is those 40 units, you've spent less than the down payment on either one of those houses to acquire those customers. And 40 units is obscenely easy to manage. Like, it doesn't sound that easy, but as soon as you have just base systems, really minor, simple, it's like, yeah, you got to be able, you're going to need to know one good plumber, one good handyman. You're going to need to be able to be available 10 hours a week, probably, for the customer service. You'd be at a price point that you could actually afford potentially a virtual assistant. It's very easy. And you just made a much smaller investment. And a nice thing is as well, and this is something that I think nobody ever talks about in real estate, that I think is kind of a farce, whether it's on Twitter or anything else. When you buy 4 single family homes, it's not impossible that one of those houses sucks. Whether it's the tenant you place, whether it's the plumbing or the electrical or the city or whatever. It's like, I've seen enough that it's like, we look on Twitter and it's like, oh, well, my 14 houses are great. It's like, dude, you're lucky. You're lucky. Because I know a lot of people,
You're gonna get a bad one at some point. You're gonna get a bad one.
it's,
It's coming.
stop calling the luck your skill, because you are just lucky. And the people who have really bad experiences are unlucky. It's nice when you're managing the property, you can just say goodbye to the dogs, right? It's like, yeah, that one is not worth the time. Sorry, man. Now, what I'll say beyond that is, let's take it to the extreme, which is when you get a property management business to this scale that it's a separate, like something a PE company or billionaire would want to buy as a real estate investment. You could assume a 5,000 door property management company and a 500 unit portfolio of properties, right? Owning it yourself, are equivalent in cash flows. So they're very similar assets in terms of valuations. Now, the difference between the two is this, is they will be equivalent in net income and asset value, but the property management company will be matching the net income on the real estate portfolio while paying for marketing growth. So the property management company will naturally accrue doors slowly but surely. It'll go from 5,000 to 6,000 while maintaining net operating income equivalent to the same real estate portfolio. If the real estate portfolio wants to sustain its growth from 500 to 600 doors, it will have to eat out of that net cash flow. Now, we don't have enough time on here or the spreadsheet necessary, but if somebody runs the numbers, I guarantee you it's true. I've thought about this a lot. Now, let's talk drawbacks, okay? The first thing everybody's going to say is, well, what about equity? Well, once you hit big scale, the equity is equivalent. I just went over that. At the small scale, you're right. You will have equity to the extent of your down payment and appreciation in your rental properties that will exceed the property manager. Now, I'd make the argument that you're when you've only spent to get 40 doors times $500 is $8,000, right? If you've only spent that to acquire 40 doors in a management company. And then you have basically probably around 1,500 a unit is probably industry standard nationwide. That means you've got give or take 60,000, 70,000 in equity. It's actually a better return on equity. Like your appreciation in equity is actually much better than owning 4 rental properties. But there is an equity component that is different. Now, on a depreciation basis, that's another common one that people talk about. I'd actually argue that you have better tax, I guess, tax strategy as a business owner than you
as a
do as a real
business.
estate investor. They're similar, right? I don't think there's a clear cut winner. I'm not an accountant, but I would say you probably have more levers to pull as a business owner than you do as a real estate investor, even if the real estate investor's levers are a little stronger. Um, there's also a risk component that's worthy of consideration. And one of the key points with that is when you're the property owner, anything that goes wrong at that property is on you. Tenant has a dog they're not supposed to have, or their friend brings over a dog that jumps the fence and goes and bites somebody, somehow it's your fault. And that has actually happened. I have 2 of those lawsuits that are in process right now, where they're trying to sue us and sue the owners for tenants unapproved animals. Now, that as a property manager, you basically get to indemnify yourself via the contract as long as there's no hyper negligence or anything like that. But as a business owner, there's this whole side of risk that doesn't apply to most real estate investors. It depends on where you are, but especially when you start hiring employees, I would say that having employees, at least in California, but probably in this country, is actually a lot more dangerous than having tenants. There's a really big risk to your employees suing you or getting hurt or anything else. So when you weigh them all up, I think most people view the traditional, hey, I'm just going to buy a property and then I'll have it forever for my kids. And there's a permanence to that I agree is hard to do. You've got to manage the property management company if it's there on a small scale, but it will produce far better returns. So if somebody was looking at, hey, I've got 50 grand and I want to go buy 1 rental, or I want to start a property management company to get to say 100 doors and then use the income of that 100 doors to go buy 20 rental properties over the next 5 years, I actually think that's a much faster way to build a portfolio. So I know that was long-winded, but anything you want to jump in on, let me know.
Well, not to mention that you're actually like going back to the marketing machine, you're building your own direct to seller marketing channel, because who's going to know about them selling a rental property first is going to be probably their property manager is going to mean, so I don't know what that dynamic looks like in house when somebody's looking to get rid of a property, but it would be an interesting conversation to be like, oh, well, we've been managing this property for 4 years. Mr. Johnson, can I just buy it from you instead? And you're utilizing the cash flow from your company to then go buy that property, and you keep it all in house. But now you're just slowly building. You're building both. I think it never nothing nothing it rarely lives on the edges in a binary situation, either or. There's always something that's in the middle, and I think both can work. Like you had said, it's interesting because the low upfront cost with the high monthly return on it, you can look at it as a cash on cash deal that looks really great. So screw the equity. Cash on cash, this looks awesome. Then with the upside of potentially buying rental properties that are already within your portfolio that you don't have to go and find, that you're probably getting at below market rate, there's a lot of awesome opportunities within using property management as your like pillar piece.
Yeah, I think you hit on something. I would bet that about 90% of property managers in the country, their retirement strategy is own my property management company, hopefully be able to have my kids take it over or whatever, but fundamentally be at the center of this real estate world where, all right, I know when the deal's popping up, I have access to the buyers and to the sellers, and I know the contractors, and it's like, okay, it's time for me, and just every year let me buy a couple rentals. And I'll point out my business partner's uncle, who he bought the business from. That's exactly what he did. He just was involved in real estate, started managing his own properties, managing other people's properties, and acquiring. Hey, grandpa died over here. Hey, I'll buy it from you. Fair price, fair market, but he has advantages in improving the investment. I mean, this is a crazy story. I mean, we can kind of wrap up here. I know we're over time, but this sounds crazy, and everybody's going to think, "Oh my God, that's the luckiest thing that ever happened to anyone ever." But these sorts of stories happen all the time in property management. So, business partner's uncle in like the '90s had a friend and also a guy who built a real estate portfolio. By the time he was like 40, he had like 25 units in San Diego,
Hmm.
and basically this guy suffered. He had a mentally challenged younger brother and only his mom, and he developed tinnitus, where there's ear ringing, and it just literally he ended up killing himself because of it. He just couldn't survive. Now, what he left in his will was my business partner's uncle, Steve, I need you to manage these properties for my brother. I want you to take care of him, manage these properties for him. And when he passes away, however far into the future that is, they'll go to you. And the reason why is, what's the best way to ensure that your property manager takes care of the properties that you're leaving to your, you know, disabled brother? It's by making the property manager the future owner.
Right.
And this sounds crazy, but after 30 years of managing those properties like they were his own, he was basically the challenged brother passed away, and somewhere in the range of $7 million of real estate went directly to this person who'd been managing it, doing a great job for years. And that sounds like, oh my God, what? That's the luckiest person I ever met in my whole life. It's like, I guarantee you, if you polled 20 property managers, a handful of them will have heard exactly this story
Yeah.
because it's so common.
Well, and you also have to be willing to do the work in the, it kind of goes back to the book Outliers, where it talks about Bill Gates and growing up near having a high school that had a unique partnership with a college that did coding in a specific way. And it was the only place in the country that ever did it. Right. So you could look at
Mhm.
Bill Gates and say, well, he was the only person that ever got to do that. He was so lucky. Well, yes. And at the same time, he after
Did
school would
work.
spend 10 hours a night going there and coding and spending all that every waking hour learning that. So
Mhm.
both can be true totally. I mean, yes, I think that's an awesome story. The other thing is that you had mentioned lawsuits. I know a couple property managers, and another part of being in the property management game is just being comfortable being sued, because he said every month he's in a different lawsuit of some sort. It just, there's no way of getting around some angry tenant is going to come up and try to sue you for something, and 99% of them don't go anywhere, but you just kind of have to have thick skin to know that you're going to be in those types of battles all the time.
Yeah, you're in the eye of the hurricane, man. Whether it's the tenants, we've been extorted by owners where, I mean, literally, like, hey, I'm going to go to the Department of Real Estate. I'm going to file a lawsuit. So, it's like, it's a constant. Like, when I was early in the business, I remember the first time I ever got a letter of demand, I almost shit my pants. Like, it was
Right.
bad.
Right.
Now it's like when we got the most recent dog bite, I'm like, go ahead and very, very politely send them our contract, showing them that we're indemnified, and tell them very politely to go fuck themselves. Like,
Yeah.
it's like, tell them have a great day. I'm really sorry somebody got bit by a dog, but don't call me. This
Right.
isn't on us. Right. And it's like, it's like, I don't want to bring up a charged subject, but you look at Donald Trump's attitude, and I and I'm like, that looks like somebody's been sued a lot. Like,
For sure.
he's like, man, I don't really care. Like,
Yeah.
like
Wait till the
you know,
third or fourth letter and then I'll respond. I never respond to the first letter anymore. It's always
exactly,
like, if they have enough time to send me the second or third, then we'll start being serious about
exactly,
it. So,
exactly.
well, Parker, I appreciate you being here, man. I appreciate you being in the community. It's people that aren't in the Million Dollar Dads community are missing out just from your wisdom alone. I mean, we get to have conversations. I feel like selfishly, it's awesome because I get to have conversations like this with you much more often, and I'm super lucky for that. You talked about, being the largest third party property management company in the country. That's not going to happen only in the state of California. So anybody that's listening to this that has even thought about, you know, the world of property management, I would encourage you to reach out to Parker and see what that could potentially look like. This is something that I, having a real estate background and knowing the right people here in Wisconsin, am going to explore myself, because growing to be the largest is not going to just be Parker. It's going to be through partnerships with other people across the country. So if you're interested in that, I would say reach out definitely. Parker, how can people best connect with you? Where's the best place to have a conversation with you?
Yeah, so I'm a little immature here. The only thing I've got is Twitter. I don't have a personal website with a sign up sheet, and I won't give anyone my email because I already spent too much time in there. But you can find me on Twitter at Carker Pox. So just the first letter of my first and last name switched. That's my handle. But I'd love to connect. I mean, whether it's with real estate, it's funny. I, for the most part, don't really like real estate. I like business, and
Right.
I happen to know a ton about real estate, but I love talking business. I love batting around ideas. I think you know this from me. I certainly know a lot and can talk about how to grow a portfolio. And for me, I'm just kind of like you guys. Like I want to take a moment to give you and TJ, but yeah, props. I think what you guys have built and are building is phenomenal. And you know, I've always found that if you're just here to provide value, like it will always come back. The people who are chasing dollars are running in circles. The people who are pushing value out, whether it's today or next week or next year, like buckets of money come back. And
Mm-hmm.
so for me, it's, I appreciate you guys because I know you've taken all this on with just the goal of providing value for hopefully a long term return. But I've gotten an immense amount of value. I think you already know. I basically tell anybody who's a dad I know, like, hey, you should check out this group because it's nice to have people who have the two focuses of business and family. And like, I don't fit in with most people. Like, I know a lot of business people, I know a lot of family men, but if they're W 2 and they have a family, or they're a business owner and they don't have a family, it's like
Mm-hmm.
they're missing half of that. And I think you guys have really hit a vein that's going to do super well. And I've already gotten so much from it. So I just wanted to say thank you. And I'd be happy to help anyone who needs it and can reach out.
Yeah, man. Even if you just want to talk soccer, go to
Yeah.
Carker Box. It reminds me of, and I'll just quick wrap with this, man. It reminds me, shout out to Tony Wadinka, who's definitely not listening to this podcast and haven't talked to him in 15 years. But we went through a stint in high school where we would only talk to each other by reversing the letters of every word. So he would be like Woni Tadinka. And we would just like we went through a season of probably 3 months where this group of guys would talk with backwards letters like that. So every time I read your Twitter handle, it reminds me of that and makes me smile. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Hike Miggins. I really appreciate it.
That's it, man. You got it. You got it. All right, everybody. Well, that's the pod. We'll see you next time. Thanks.